In the last video, we were talking about the price consumption curve and how that price consumption curve that's being created off of budget constraints and indifference curves will eventually lead into this demand curve, this downward sloping demand curve. Well, we've gotten there. And this demand curve in this chart right here is the demand curve for hamburgers per week, or it's the demand curve for hamburgers for that individual consumer that we have been talking about this whole time. So a couple of things to notice about this chart. First off, prices are on the vertical axis and quantity is down here on the horizontal axis. So what does this chart show us? This chart is showing us at how much we are going to be consuming of burgers at the different price levels, or the quantity that is demanded at different price levels. So this demand curve is a curve of a schedule that shows, holding all other factors invariant, the inverse relationship between the price of a commodity and the amount of the commodity consumed. So let's break this down real quick. So first off, this holding all other factors invariant ought to sound vaguely familiar. It kind of sounds like holding all else constant, or that Latin word, that Latin phrase, ceteris paribus. So remember, ceteris paribus meaning we're going to hold all else constant. We're not going to allow the prices to change. We're not going to allow the markets to change. If everything else is set, this is the way it would be as the price of, say, hamburgers change. So it's a schedule. So it's going to show us a relationship. And then it's an inverse relationship, meaning as one goes up, like if the prices of hamburgers go up, the quantity or the other side goes down. So it has an inverse relationship. How does that make sense? Think about your own personal life. If the prices of a good are going up, are you going to buy more or less? You're probably going to buy less. If the prices of hamburgers are going up, we are actually going to be consuming less of those goods. Now you're going to see me, you saw that I underlined this, that this is a relationship between price and quantity. Every line that's graphed shows a relationship of some kind. In this particular case, it's going to be a relationship between the price and the quantity of burgers. So what are some of the factors that are affecting consumer demand, individual consumer demand? Well, the price of the product, the original price of the product, is going to be affecting this demand curve. Well, that makes sense because we're developing this demand curve off of changes in the price of hamburgers, right? So remember that we have a budget of $5. So if our budget is $5 and the price of hamburgers are $6, can we afford any hamburgers? No, we can't. So we're going to be consuming zero. What happens if the price falls to, say, $1? Well, if the price falls to $1, we're going to be consuming 3 hamburgers. And I know I got my line slightly off there. Let me see if I can draw them a little bit better. But if the price is at $1, we're going to be consuming right around 3 hamburgers right there. Then, if the price increases to $1.25, we were consuming 2 hamburgers. So we know that the price of the product is going to have an effect on this because we are seeing that as the own price changes, the quantity being consumed is changing. The price of another good, we know that that's going to have an effect on it. Because if you remember, as we changed the price of hamburgers, what was happening to the quantity of tacos being consumed? Well, as the price of hamburgers fell, quantity of tacos fell. If the price of hamburgers rose, quantity of tacos rose. So we know that the price of another good is going to have an effect on it. The disposable income is going to have an effect on it. Right now, we're dealing with a budget of $5. But what happens if there was a budget of $10? We're going to see that demand curve actually do something like that. And I know I got a little bump there. It would actually be more of a sloping line on that regard, but it's going to move out this way because we can now afford more. And then the last one is taste and preferences. So a quick insight into taste and preferences. What if you just prefer more tacos to hamburgers? Or what if you prefer more hamburgers to tacos? Well, your individual taste and preferences are going to have an effect on it too. So this demand curve It typifies the amount of a commodity consumers are willing and able, that they are willing and able to purchase at each possible price during some specific time in a specific market, ceteris paribus. So here's another aspect that we need to bring into these demand curves, is that we're talking about a specific market and a specific time. So if you think about it, let's say it's lunchtime where you're at, and what are you going to have for lunch? Now, let's say that you're in town, you're working in town, you can go out and eat, and you have a whole bunch of different options. But during the week, you've ate hamburgers Monday, hamburgers Tuesday, hamburgers Wednesday, hamburgers Thursday, and now it's Friday. And you want something else. Well, that week and how much you've consumed over the course of that week is going to affect your demand for that good. Also, if you're in a specific market, well, let's say that there's only one diner in town and they only serve hamburgers, your demand for hamburgers is going to be based off of that specific market, versus if you're in an area that serves hamburgers, or you can go to a pizza place, or you can go to a Chinese food place, those specific markets are going to have an effect on that demand as well. All of this is ceteris paribus, assuming nothing else changes, like no food scares or your taste and preferences don't change. So, the demand for a commodity can change over time and location, and we need to specify the demand, or a specification of demand, or of demand will include both this time and this location aspect. So, if we look back on this demand curve, you see it says quantity of hamburgers per week. So, we've already hit on this, but at a price of $1.25, remember that there's 2 burgers that are going to be consumed, and we can draw that out on the graph like we did. Price of $1, 3 burgers are going to be consumed. And at a price of $6, well, there's 0 burgers are going to be consumed because there's a budget of 5 and we can't afford it. Now, this demand curve and this price consumption curve, well, they're 2 sides of the exact same coin. We're actually going to be developing our demand curve off of our price consumption curve. So this demand curve is a price quantity pairs in equilibrium. So remember that we have this consumer equilibrium, and we're looking at the price and the quantity pairs back on this price consumption curve. And we're looking at these price quantity pairs that are in equilibrium that we're finding off of our price consumption curve. Only now we're going to rearrange this graph where y-axis is the price, x-axis is the quantity. This price consumption curve is a preliminary representation of the demand curve. This price consumption curve is what we're going to be developing the demand curve off of. The equilibrium price quantity pairs, you see it's showing up again because it's 2 sides of the same coin, right? The equilibrium price quantity pairs are found using the tangencies of the budget line and the indifference curve, where the slope of the budget line is equal to the slope of the indifference curve, and we're maximizing our indifference curves, we're maximizing our utility given our budget, and where those 2 slopes are equal to each other, the tangencies is what it's known as. We're finding those equilibrium, those consumer equilibrium points that we've already talked about at the beginning of this chapter. And we're basically going to take this price consumption curve, these consumer equilibriums, and we're going to transfer it over into these demand curves. So, like I mentioned, and I'll go through it again real quick, we have the budget constraint based off of the prices of 2 goods and the budget. That budget constraint, or then we also have the indifference curves, and the indifference curves show how much are we willing to give up one good for another. We put both of those on the same graph, and guess what we have? We have our consumer equilibriums. And these consumer equilibriums are going to show how much are consumers going to buy at different price levels. And then those different price levels, this price quantity pairs at consumer equilibrium, we then take that data, put it into another column or put it into another chart, and we put the price as the y-axis, quantity as the x-axis, and we come up with our demand curve.